Great. Good morning, everyone. I see folks are tuning in and logging in. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll give you folks a few moments to set up and situate yourselves. Go pick up your quick beverage and settle down to an exciting presentation this morning. And we have none other than Trisha Lizam, and I'll be telling you more about her momentarily. But in the meantime, just wanted to make sure that you folks are comfortable and ready for our day two of presentation on healing, more on healing. So I'm just giving more of our partners time to log on. And yes, we are doing Zoom, of course, and many of you are very familiar. So if you are getting ready, as some of have already, please stretch your fingers up a bit and introduce yourselves in the chat. We are using a Zoom webinar format. So for those of you who are concerned about, oh no, is my mic going to be on? Is my camera going to be on? So if you are an attendee, those are automatically off. And so we invite you to post in the chat or in the Q&A any questions that you may have. So welcome to all of our attendees. And so far, oh my gosh, we have our partners all the way from DC also. So thank you so much. So we shall go ahead and get started. Just wanted to say that this is day two of our Guam Collaboration Project Roundtable, reflecting on history and culture to address violence in our communities today. So, of course, just to start off, we, of course, are very fortunate to receive funding from our agencies, from the Office on Violence Against Women and the Family Violence Prevention and Services Program with the Department of Health and Human Services to support us in providing this webinar for you. Just wanted to give a brief preview for today. We've got, oh my gosh, I've copied the wrong slide, but Trisha Lizama, my cursor here notes that it doesn't recognize the spelling, but that is correct. Dr. Trisha Lizama will be presenting on reflecting on culture and addressing healing through culturally responsive ways. Just wanted to do a quick reminder, if today's your first time joining us, we do have webinar materials that will be available for you to download after the sessions are over. And it is on guamcoalition.org. When you go to our website at the top, usually on the top right corner, you'll see a login button that when you click on it, it will ask for a username. So please type in Roundtable. The password is MAR 2021. And of course, it is case sensitive. So it's capital M, capital A, and capital R 2021. For those of you interested in obtaining continuing education unit, the University of Guam has afforded us one CEU for 10 contact hours. Of course, the stipulation is you must have attended all of the 4 days rather, of sessions. You will need to contact the University of Guam directly, and on the screen you will see the email. And then the subject is, of course, the title of this workshop. Just a reminder, please be sure to complete your evaluation forms, and Zoom will, of course, remind you at the end of the day or tomorrow to remind you to please be sure to fill out your evaluation. Just wanted to also give you a preview of what else is coming next week. This is day two today, and so join us next week for day three. We will have a panel of agency providers the whole day, the whole 2.5 hours that we have. So please email info@guamcoalition.org if you'd like more information. But so far, our confirmed panelists, and we have quite a list of key folks, of course, starting with our key partner, Catherine Chan, with the Office on Trafficking in Persons. Just want to also acknowledge Catherine and her colleague Kaylin Cockett, who actually were the brainchild for our being able to partner with them on presenting this to you. So we have quite a list of key individuals who will be providing information on resources that we maybe have or maybe have access to, maybe not know, that we'll be able to reach out to them as well for resources. So tune in for that too. Then on day 4, which is our final day, we have our Lieutenant Governor Joshua Tenorio, who will be doing the opening remarks for us, as we will be holding roundtable discussions. So on that day, our panelist is you. We are seeking your assistance and participation again, and we want to hear from you. And just to give you a preview, these are some of the breakout room discussions that we will be holding. It's about the role of training, data, culture, and violence prevention, as well as partnerships. So we certainly hope that you will continue to join us and be engaged with our moderators and our facilitators in being able to share your perspectives on how we can better improve, address access, and ensure that our families and communities are safe, violence free, and healthy as well, given this COVID, right? So thank you again. Please ensure that you continue to be safe in these times. And at this time, I would like to just give a brief introduction to our presenter today, and that is Trisha Lizama. She is an associate professor of social work at the University of Guam. She earned her doctorate degree in human services from Capella University, and her dissertation focused on traditional healing practices of the Suruhanu and Suruhana, and was titled, How Are Traditional Chamorro Healing Practices Being Preserved and Perpetuated in Modern Guam? She earned her master's in social work from the University of Hawaii at Manoa and a bachelor's degree in social work and psychology from the University of Guam. She's certainly homegrown. Prior to her work at the University of Guam, Dr. Lizama was employed as a social worker for the Department of Veterans Affairs. She has also served our nation in the United States Air Force Reserves. Dr. Lizama is a licensed professional counselor, marriage and family therapist, mental health counselor, and a licensed clinical social worker. And today, she is our key presenter. So thank you so much, Dr. Tricia, for joining us today. And let me just get situated here with, so we can get your slides on. Okay, I had this earlier. There we go.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be able to present today on a subject that I think is very important and I would love to share. Let me just bring up my slides really quick.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm still seeing the error message.
Really? Okay,
Yeah,
I've got you on backup. Why don't I do it for now, and then at the break, we'll try it again.
okay, let's try
Just
that.
cue me when you're ready then. So,
Sure, but I won't be able to show a video until later. Ugh, okay,
oh gosh, yes.
let's just try.
Okay.
I'm not sure why slides is virtual background.
Do you see the
Okay,
slides now?
I do. Good morning, everybody, or good evening for some of you. So today's topic is reflecting on the Chamorro culture and addressing healing through culturally responsive ways using traditional healing. And as Cynthia shared, I spent a lot of time not only in my dissertation, but just researching for maybe the last 10 or so years. Next slide. I wanted to start with a brief like chant, but we're not going to be able to like access that at this time due to technical difficulties because I don't think my Dropbox can be access, but or can you try?
Certainly. Is this it?
Yes, can you go to like 1 minute around there? Oh, right there. Perfect.
Tuhun, itini tuhun, gehalom, hinasun itzahululo, mahanet non, ihinafasiha. Tai hinekok jantai tsi gehalom hinasun itzahululo gehalom
Alat para
hinasun
ihinamlota is a
Okay,
look at
stop.
Chamorro traditional healing practice as it exists today.
We'll be watching the rest of it later, but I just wanted to start with the Chan, and that's Master Chanter Leonard Villagomez, and some of you might have heard him before. And usually when we start, we like to start with like a prayer or a chant. Most of the traditional healers always start with some kind of prayer, right? Because they will share, a zillion times that their gift is from God. Go ahead, and can you go back to my slides?
So that's where I just kind of messed it up by pulling. Give
No,
me a
it's okay.
quick moment.
It's okay. I'm sorry that I'm not able to control that myself, but hopefully we can fix that after the break.
Yes, definitely. So let me get situated. Let me repost your slides on. So I'm looking for your slides on my screen now. Okay, let me. Okay, this is when I wish my tech person were right next to me to take over, but I've got this.
You got this.
Apologies, everyone. We're working this through, so I've got her screen there.
Okay. So, just to kind of give you a brief background geographically, right? That Guam is in Micronesia, and we're surrounded, of course, by the Pacific Ocean and all these many wonderful islands. Next slide. And just again, a brief overview for those of you that may have never been to Guam or really don't know much about Guam is we're a pretty small island, 212 square miles long. Our population is roughly 168,000 people. And then the ethnic breakup would be 37% Chamorro, 26% Filipino, 7% white, 7% Chukis, and 2% Korean. Next slide. And who are the Chamorro people, right? So I feel like I'm a history teacher for the next like few slides, just to kind of give you some background and put our traditional healing in context. And so the Chamorro people are the indigenous inhabitants of Guam. They were very skilled in seafaring and also weaving and pottery making. And in our Chamorro legend, that the world was created by twins called Punta and Fauna, right? And so in Umatic, you can still witness the rocks of Punta and Fauna. And prior to 1898, the Chamorros were self-governing. Next slide. Due to our history, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the traditional healing, is the Chamorro people have endured 350 years of colonization, which is one of the longest histories of colonizations among all peoples of the world. And so, next slide. And just to again put things in perspective, so in March 1521, Magellan came to Guam and claimed Guam or Guahan in Chamorro for Spain. And there was a lot of things happening at the time. There were lots of battles for different reasons, and introduction of diseases, because the Chamorro population was, of course, protected from anything, in the outside world until the ships started to come to Guam. And a lot of the population of the Chamorro people died. And then in June 21, Spain ceded Guam to the United States by nature of the Treaty of Paris. Next slide. And then in terms of continued recolonization or reoccupation, Guam was invaded by Japan, 1941 to 1944. And then there was a U.S. reoccupation by the United States in July 21st, which is, our Liberation Day, through present times. And so in 1950, Guam passed their Organic Act. So our political status is a governing unincorporated territory, which means we're a U.S. colony and we're on the United Nations list of 16 non-self-governing governments in the world, right? And so that, depending on where you view Guam's political status, can be very problematic. But I'm not going to give you a lesson in politics today. Next. And so in terms of the traditional healers, like just putting all of that in context for the traditional healers, a lot of the traditional practices changed when the Spanish came to Guam. And the Spanish were Catholic, and the Chamorros had their own religion, or they believed in their ancestors and spirits. And then when the Spanish came, became this formal religion of Catholicism. And so a lot of the practices of the Chamorros, excuse me, grab some water. The Chamorros at the time were not seen, they were seen to be very pagan, right? Because it wasn't in line with the Catholic faith and the Catholic practices. And so one famous example that you'll always hear and read about in Chamorro, in history books, is Chamorros venerated skulls of their ancestors. And so they would put the skulls on altars. But it makes total, maybe at the time the Spanish said, well, that's not, pagan like, you shouldn't do those kinds of things. But Chamorros at the time, and who had cameras to be able to take pictures? I mean, how many of you have pictures of your deceased loved ones in your house? I'm sure if I could see all of you raise your hand, many of you would have a picture of a deceased loved one in your home. But at the time there were no pictures, and so they used skulls, right? And so there were a lot of practices that the Spanish thought were, again, pagan-like, were not in line with Catholic religion. And so they wanted the Chamorros to change their term, right? So healers at the time were called Macanas and Cacanas. But because of everything that was going on with religion, they wanted the Chamorros to change their term for healers to Suruhanu and Suruhana, which actually means surgeon, right? When we look at the literal definition, Suruhanu and Suruhana means surgeon in Spanish. And so prior to the Spanish time on Guam, there was already, the healers had been established, way long before the Spanish had come. And there were rules of how one could be a healer. It was passed on from generation to generation. So if grandmother was a healer, she usually passed it on to mother, and mother would pass it on to child. But it wasn't only matrilineal. It could also be father to son, or even father to daughter. It wasn't just, by gender. This second one is born breeched, gifted with good hands for massaging. So in theory, if you were born breeched, so if it wasn't head first, then you were said to have good hands and you were be gifted as a massager. And so nowadays, this is a hard category to distinguish, because babies are not usually allowed to be born breeched because it's dangerous, right? So if ultrasound detects that the baby is going to be born breeched, then either they try to shift the baby or they perform a C-section, right? So sometimes this category, we can debate this, in conversations, we debate this category. And then this third category, born between two siblings of the same gender. In my current research, I haven't been able to confirm a lot of this, right? A lot of this born between two siblings of the same gender was more things that I saw that was documented. But as I talked to healers in the last 10 years, like some of them are familiar and then some of them are not familiar, but it's definitely category number 1 and number 2. Next slide. So the traditional healers on Guam. So I shared about the shift. So the original Chamorro word was Makana and Kakana. And then through Spanish colonization, the words changed from Suruhanu to Suruhana. And then with current research, we consulted many people and looked through like old documents, and then the word Zo'umti popped up. And so Zo'umti, so umti means to treat. And then Zo, the Y-O in front of everybody, every word brings it to a higher level. And so this is a healer, right? So mostly in modern day, we use Zo'umti, but people still use the word Suruhanu and Suruhana, right? So we kind of go back and forth, but we're trying to use more of the Zo'umti, the healer. So what would be a healer's purpose, or what do healers do on Guam? So there's several types of healers. One healer, and some of these healers can do all three. So one healer can make omelet, right? And omelet is medicine. One healer can do massaging, and massaging in Chamorro is called lasa. And then if somebody has some kind of like spiritual issue, we'll talk about that in more detail, they go through a process called sufi. And sufi is a process of using burning palm leaves and using the incense and using chants and prayers to chase away a bad spirit, right? So some healers can do all three of the things that I mentioned, making omelet, lasing, and suffing. Some people can do two. Most healers will do two, and some choose to do the suffing because in many of the stories that I've heard, the suffering takes a toll on people's bodies. It takes a toll on your own spirit. So if like most of the older healers will tell me that they're choosing not to do sufi because they feel they're not as strong to take on some of the spiritual natures that they might see, right? So but there are some healers that specialize just in the sufi. What do people go to healers for? People go to healers for everything. Most common things would be women issues. If a woman was having an issue with fertility or excessive bleeding, or lots of baby issues, the babies are congested, they have the flu, they have a lot of like phlegma or congestion, they're just not able to like spit all of that up, and then it can turn into pneumonia. They treat sprained ankles, they treat the flu, pneumonia, bites, many skin issues, eczema, shingles. There's just a bunch of skin issues, and then spiritual issues. So people go to the healers for everything. And I know this conference is about healing from sexual abuse and violence, and I'll talk a little bit about that because I had a whole conversation with the healers just yesterday just about that subject matter, so that I could be offer some examples for today. Next. So I just kind of want to give you a background, because healers, they're pretty rare. We don't have a lot of healers for many different reasons, and I want to share a story, right? I want to share many stories. I want this I will give you an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but my style of having people learn is really to tell stories about many different things, right? Especially in this with this topic. And so Anne Pabuski and her team at the time, they wanted to know how the knowledge was transmitted, because as I shared with you, the knowledge was generally transmitted from generation to generation. But as Chamorro people, as a Chamorro culture, we are a very verbal culture, right? We're great at telling stories, but even in our language, we didn't have a written Chamorro language until the early 80s. Everything was spoken, right? And so this is a concern, because if we're good at telling stories and we transmit it by, generation to generation, some of that can get lost. And so in order for that to not get lost, we need to be able to document a lot of these things. And so Anne Pabuski and her team, they were able to document a lot of great stuff. They interviewed 34 people. And maybe 34 doesn't sound a lot to you, but it's so significant, because healers, based on values, and I'm going to talk about Chamorro values, they don't self promote. They don't go out and advertise. They don't say, hey, I'm a healer, come and check me out. You'll never ever see advertising for a healer. And so for them to garner 34 people who trusted them to be able to tell their story is hugely significant in many ways. And I talked a lot, a little bit about colonization, and this is also the reason why people don't talk about healing, because in the Spanish times, like I told you, they wanted to change the practices because they were not in line with the Catholic faith at the time. So the practice started to go underground. And even when the Americans came, after Japan, at the time, the Americans wanted to build this new, wonderful Susanna hospital. The Chamorros were never exposed to a hospital or any type of medical treatment in that way. That was all new to them. And so the concept of going to a lab and getting your blood, which might be very common for us, going to a lab and getting our blood drawn, that was all very foreign to the Chamorros. So when the hospital was built, and people went around and said, hey, Chamorro people, we built a new hospital. When you're sick, go there and get treatment. They didn't go. Why? Because it was foreign, one, and two, because they already had their own way of treating people that they've been doing for hundreds of years. So it didn't make sense, but the Americans were upset with this. They couldn't understand why the Chamorros wouldn't want to go to this brand new hospital. And so as a result, they started to, which makes me very sad, they started to write all this negative propaganda about traditional healing and how it's not good and you shouldn't do it. And they even started to punish people. And so the practice started to go underground, hidden, because of course people didn't want to be punished. And I found an old essay as I was doing research where somebody interviewed a healer, and it was just, it was somebody's assignment. It was an essay that, fortunately got archived in Mark. And the healer talked about how her daughter was very sick and she did go to the hospital and she was given antibiotics. And then after like so many days, her daughter was not better. And though she went to a healer and then took all the treatments of the healer, all the Amit, and the daughter started to get better, but she didn't know, she didn't know what, because she had used both medicines. And, in modern times, what we know now is most courses of antibiotics are 10 days, right? So they don't really take effect immediately. So it could have been one, it could have been both. And so the point was, she was just thrilled that her daughter was better. And so she went back. She, of course, thanked the healer. She went to the doctor and also thanked the doctor. And the doctor's like, oh, so the medicine worked. And her response was, well, I'm not sure, because I also tried the Chamorro medicine, right? And the doctor inquired more about what Chamorro medicine was. And he was kind of upset that she went out and sought another medicine and thought that the doctor's medicine was not helpful, right? So then the doctor tells the military police, and then they go confront the healer and tell her not to practice. So when you look at the healing practices now, it makes total sense. They don't advertise. It's all word of mouth, because that continued to this day. Like, oh, are we going to get in trouble? We don't want to be advertising our services because we're going to get in trouble, and so this is the suppression of some of this due to colonization. And so I apologize, because sometimes I get really excited, and I do, I'll eventually get to my point, but sometimes I go the long-winded way, but it's all very useful information, and I promise I will tie it all together at the end. And so Anne Pabuski, she interviews 34 people, 34 people, 25 female and 9 male. Prior to her, Pat McMakin was an anthropologist, and he did his study with males. But one of the things that he determined in his study was that only healers can be males. And this is why Anne Pabuski's like, no, that's not true. Healers can't just be male. And so then she did her study, and then she found 25 female. And I'm guessing it's because people are not volunteering this information for the reasons that I told you about. Even today, you're never going to see an advertisement in the newspaper or the phone book. How are you going to find a healer? You're going to call your mayor. You're going to call your mayor, or somebody in your family is going to tell you. And now we have Gumazo Umti, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And so after Anne Pabuski, there were a number of years that went by, and nobody really did, a big study. And so I decided to do a study, and I was only able to interview 11 people. And again, that doesn't sound like a lot. And I really was so ambitious. And the reason why I didn't get a lot of people, because a lot of people said no to me. And at the time, I was very crushed, because I was like, oh, why are people saying no to me? Like, I'm Chamorro. I want to document all of this. I want to preserve it, and I found out for 2 reasons. And so I'll go to that in another slide. So in more current interviews, I've interviewed a lot more people. I've been able to do a documentary, which if we have time, I want to show you a few stories in the documentary, just so that you can see the healers practicing, right? And I forgot to preface this, that I am not a healer myself. I have certainly learned a lot of things. My grandmother made omelet, but she wouldn't identify herself as a healer. And I think it's because of colonization and the practice going underground, right? But in this study, where in my journey to learn all of this, my grandmother and all her sisters made omelet, right? But as growing up, I just thought that everybody did it. That was just part of our Chamorro culture, and everybody, and my joke to people when I tell people is, when I when I was growing up, rather, in the refrigerator, there was water, there was always Chamorro medicine. And if we were lucky, we would have tang for special occasions. But when I was a kid, it was water and Chamorro medicine. And if you tasted Chamorro medicine, it's bitter, right? And so, but you get used to that taste, and you just know that it's good for you, and your grandma says to drink it, and so you just better drink it. And in reflection, growing up, I feel like I was a pretty healthy kid. Like, don't get me wrong, we went to the doctor sometimes. So I'm not saying pick one or the other. I think that they both have value, and we should understand what both has to offer, and we should be able to have both practicing, and not say that one's better than the other, or one's tabooed, because I do know that both have their value. Next slide. So just to summarize, with Pabuski's study, there were 34 interviews conducted. And as I shared earlier, most of these people learn from somebody in their family. And why I am stressing this is because this is not the case currently. So most of these people learn from their family, and this is causing debate, because people will tell me, well, not everybody can be a healer. And I agree, not everybody can be a healer. Because there's traits that a healer has to have, just like not everybody can be a doctor, right? There's traits that a doctor has to have. And so when when Anne Pabuski was doing her study at the time, which was in the 80s, many of these people learned from somebody in their family. But what was significant about Pat McMakin that I used to kind of debate with some people is that Pat McMakin, and remind you, this is in the 80s. And there wasn't a lot of technology in the 80s, but he was able to film his workings with the two Surahanu. And so and you can find his film on YouTube. It's black and white, but I was like, wow, I'm so glad he was able to document in that way. So it's called, if you want to search it on YouTube, it's called I Am a Pain Cure. But what was significant about Pat McMakin's study and his video of these two healers, not only that they were male, but he proved that you can learn from somebody outside of your family. In theory, we would call that an apprenticeship. And so I'll just tell you that quick story. So Tun Wan, his wife was very ill, and he brought his wife to Tun Mariano Charfris, who was the healer. And after several treatments, it didn't really say how long it took for her to be treated. She became well, and Tun Wan was so grateful that his wife was healed, and he went back to Mr. Charfris and said, how can I repay you? And in our Chamorro culture, we don't give money, right? Which is also a debate for current, because I'm going to tell you how the practice have shifted. And so people don't give money. We lived in a economy where people bartered all the time at the time, right? So people would give a sack of rice, a case of spare ribs, fruits, whatever people could give. And as a matter of fact, in this practice, if you can't give, that's okay, because healers believe that their gift comes from God or a higher power or a spirit or all of the above, that they are not to expect that people are to give them anything, and that's completely okay. So if you cannot give anything, that is totally fine, because their gift is to heal you. So Mr. Charfer says, I don't need anything, but I am getting up in age, and it's getting harder to collect the medicine because I have to trek in the jungle. Would you be willing to, I will teach you the medicines and you will be the one to pick the medicines for me? And he says, absolutely. Well, he picks the Amit for a year. And Mr. Charfer sees these qualities in Tunwan, right? Like he's a hard worker. He's fast at learning. He can recognize the plants really good. He has a good heart. He has good intentions. He wants to help people. He desires all of that. And so Mr. Charfer says after the year, and I call this, I'm a social worker, right? And I do private practice. So, most times we don't have a year to assess people. But I think in this context, Mr. Charfris had a whole year to assess Juan and see if he would be a healer himself. And through that year, he assessed that, yeah, Juan, you can be a healer. You possess all of these traits, and I've been able to observe you for a whole year. And I want you to be my apprentice. And so that's how Tun Juan learned. And then he turned around and taught other people. In the documentation, you see that he meets with other healers and they have conversations, which I'm thrilled about, because I can tell you that right now that doesn't exist. And I'm trying to change that. In 2 weeks, I'm conducting a focus group of healers, which is wonderful in many different ways. So in this example, we know from history and documentation that you can be an apprentice, so that we can have an apprenticeship. Because some of our cultural values will tell us, no, we cannot have apprenticeship because we have to learn it from our family. Next slide. And again, this is just transmission of the knowledge. Most people, again, learn from somebody in their family. In my dissertation, one person learned on her own, like reading, going into the jungle. One person told me she felt like she was guided by the spirits. She would go into the jungle and the spirits would tell her, pick this, pick this, pick this, and make this. And she would just learn. She felt like she was intuitive to these spirits and to nature and the jungle. But out of everybody, most of the people learn from their family member. Next slide. sorry, this is the story that I already told you about, and that you can look it up on YouTube, and it's titled "I Am a Pain Cure," and it was the first documented apprenticeship of a non-relative. Next slide. So in my dissertation, I wanted to know about how knowledge is preserved and perpetuated, right? I found that there were so many hardships, and so a healer doesn't operate 8 to 5, right? So a healer operates at all hours of the day, usually operates out of their home, and people just come by anytime. They don't usually call; they just come and they say, "Can you help my son or my daughter? Can you help me?" And then they'll say, "Okay, what's your sickness?" If they have the amit, they can be helped right away. If they don't have the amit, they'll say, "I need to go pick the amit to make the medicine. Come back tomorrow." Right? And then I'll be able to prepare and I'll be able to treat you. And so there were so many hardships because, it's hard to like have a life and go do like your own appointments or go do your own errands when you know that people are going to come to you at any time for help. So that's a major hardship. Finances, as I shared earlier, healers don't get paid. Okay, they don't get like a steady salary. Everything is based on donation. Everything is based on donation. And like I shared earlier, if you're not able to give anything, it's okay. And most people, even though people want to donate money, healers have a hard time accepting money. And that's in terms of our culture and cultural values. And so now that we operate on a cash economy, we've had to revisit this rule. I had a healer tell me yesterday, it's so hard. Like people will, because it really is easier for me. So every time somebody needs a healer, I get a lot of calls. People will say, "Trish, I need to find this healer. How do I find this person?" And then we make referrals or recommendations. And then the next question is, how much do I pay them? And I'm stuck, right? I'm stuck because I know my cultural values, but I always say, how much, this is how I ask people to look at the scenario. How much do you value the help that you're getting? How much would you value a doctor? How much would you value the pharmacist to prescribe the medicine for you? Right? So I don't want to answer that question for you because your value is going to be different from my value. How much do you value them? How much time did they spend with you? I will tell you, most healers will spend at least an hour or more with every person they meet, and traditional treatments are 3 days in a row. So they're going to treat you 3 days in a row and spending an hour with you at least every day for 3 days. And depending on the level of your sickness, if it's more, if you're like more sick, then they have to spend more days with you, so it could be up to 7 days. There's all this prescribed already treatment for certain things. Like I had a whole 30-minute discussion with a healer yesterday about hemorrhoids. Hemorrhoids are very hard to treat because they can reoccur. And so the healer has to see the person every day for 7 days and do 3 types of treatment and then do all of these follow-ups because they want to make sure that the hemorrhoids don't come back. So it really depends on what you're going to be treated for. With all the healers interviewed, they do want to pass on to their children. They really do. They want to keep the knowledge within their family for so many different reasons. But in modern time, children do not want to take on the practice for many different reasons. I've interviewed healers even in the other islands, Saipan, Rhoda, and Tinian. And one story that a healer told me in Saipan just really resonates with me, and I always share it. His mother, he learned this knowledge from his mother, and his mother had just passed away. And he told me he's a single man, no children, and his brother has young children. And so he says, I want to teach my brother's son, but he's too young still. And he says, I take him out to the jungle. And he always asks me, Uncle, it's hot. Uncle, how long are we going to be in the jungle? It's hot. I want to go back home. I want to watch TV. I want to be on my computer. I want to go on my phone. Right. And so he's like, as a healer, he's like, I want to teach this little guy, but at the same time, I'm in the jungle. We have to be peaceful. We have to like say our prayers. We have to, talk with the spirits, and there's a whole process for picking, medicine. It's like, here's my nephew. He doesn't really want to be here. And so it's very hard for him. And so he got very discouraged, and he's like, I'm very torn. So this is the $1 million difficult question. I said, sir, if you're not able to pass it on to your nephew or somebody in your family, and I forgot to tell you that his mom told him that he can only pass it on to somebody in his family, who will you pass it on to? And he was so conflicted. He says, I my mom taught me this, and I really want to pass it on to somebody on my family, but and I want to obey my mother, but at the same time, if I don't pass it on to anybody and I die, the knowledge will die with me. And he says, I don't know what to do, right? I don't know what to do. And so we didn't, I didn't force him to like answer it, but I would want to come back and visit him. That was a few years ago. I would want to come back and visit him and see what kind of decision he made, because his sentiments do echo the same sentiments for many of the healers. Next slide. So these are I just told you that story. And so again, I interviewed at least 15 people in Saipan and Rhoda and Tinian. So Saipan, Rhoda, and Tinian, they also share the same Chamorro culture and the same Chamorro language. I wanted to see the preservation and perpetuation was different. And in some ways, some things were different. The main difference, though, in Saipan, Rhoda, and Tinian, they are not as developed as Guam, right? On Guam, we always talk about military buildup and the concrete jungle. We have so many hotels, we have so many buildings. Well, to build up a hotel and a building and whatever we're building, you're destroying jungles, right? You're destroying the natural habitat of the medicine of the Amit. So that's a big problem for Guam. It's more difficult to find medicine in Guam than it would be in Saipan and Rhoda and Tinian for that very reason. They don't have um, a huge military presence. Saipan has a reserve unit, but in Rhoda and Tinian, well, they don't have a huge military presence, and they do preserve a lot of their Amit. They have better laws about how to preserve the Amit in these habitats. And so that's probably the main difference I saw. Everything else in terms of the difficulties, the hardships, who they want to pass it on to, that was all very similar. They could all relate. Next slide. So the reason why I was, trying to elicit from them if they were able to, if they would agree to pass it on to somebody outside of their family, is because in my research, the knowledge will die. If we don't have a mechanism to pass it on, the knowledge will die. And so in what I was trying to like assess is, can we have an apprenticeship? Have the healers talk about the qualities of who should be a healer, what's the criteria. They can even be they will be part of the selection panel. Do we need to do a formal like interview, like like how people apply for jobs? Like, do we need to do all of that? Like, can we be open to having a discussion about all of this? Because the bottom line is, if we don't develop some kind of apprenticeship, this knowledge will die, and we cannot let it die. We just can't. And so somebody asked a question. I'm not able to read the chat as fast as people are, typing questions, but some things popped up that I saw. Somebody asked, what are the qualities that a healer would look for? So some of these qualities would be for the person to be caring and loving, to be genuine, to have a good heart, and to use the knowledge for good, and to not hurt people. And when we say hurt people, most of the information that I share is very positive. But some healers have talked to me about, about black magic, that they can make things that can hurt people, like a spell or a poison or something like that. But they just mention it. They don't tell me that they're doing it. But they just mention that there are people that are out there that have bad intentions, and we have to be careful of those people. And so those are the people that they want to rule out, right? Those are the people that don't make good healers. Next slide. So in 2000, so as I shared earlier, till this day, till the Guma Zo'amti, so Guma in Chamorro's house, Zo'amti is a healer. So it's called a house of healers. The Guma Zo'amti was established in May 2016. This is the first time in history that a healer would practice outside of their home. because all of this time healers were practicing in their home. And this was debatable. So in the beginning, when they established Guma Zo'omti, three healers, three out of like how many decided, I am willing to try this new model. I'm willing to try this new model and practice in this home. Because like in one of the questions that I asked in my research, most people said, I do want to go to a traditional healer. I do, but I don't know where to find one. I don't know how to access one because like I shared, they are not advertising in the phone book or the newspaper or in Instagram or Facebook. They don't do that, right? And so this is a very new model. And how this started was with FESPAC. And FESPAC is the Olympics of culture, right? That's the best way I can describe it. And it happens every 4 years. And FESPAC came to Guam in 2016. So you had these healers from different island nations gather. And this is a picture of all of the different island nations that were represented. People from Chuuk, from Palau, from Fiji, from Samoa, just different island nations, right? And it was so wonderful to be able to talk to people and hear the similarities, hear the differences, and to be able to witness people treat other people and massage other people and just converse. I mean, it was just such a wonderful time. I wish FESPAC could be on Guam all the time, honestly. It was supposed to be in Hawaii last year, but because of COVID, it got postponed. So it's gonna skip 4 years and wait for another 4 years. And so the lady in the pink, that's Mama Chai. She's a master healer, master Surahana, master healer. And she just turned 85 like 2 weeks ago. And in the Guma Zo'omti, there's like a big tree. Mama Chai does not hesitate to climb that tree to get what she wants. She's in pretty good health for someone who's 85 years old. And so Guma Zo'omti was established in 2016, and it is in Tamuning, right, which is kind of central to Guam. And so even though people have more access to healers, there was still some debate, like what about people in the South, right? How can we access people in the South? Should we have another Guma Zo'omti in the South? So in collaboration, so the Haza Foundation helped or was the lead catalyst to start Guma Zo'omti. And so they decided that they are going to start 2 other homes. One is in Jonia and one is in Agate. And both of these healing centers were in collaboration and partnerships with the village mayor. Okay, next slide. So this is where I'm going to be jumping. In order for the knowledge to be preserved and perpetuated, we need to have apprenticeships. Apprenticeships, like I talked about, has never been formalized until maybe 2 years ago. The Haza Foundation wanted to formalize an apprenticeship, and they took all of the criteria that the healers had suggested. They made an application, so to speak. They did interviews, and they selected a group of people that they're doing a formalized apprenticeship. I was able to meet some of them the other day. I think there's about 6 people that are doing this apprenticeship. So they've done like the first, they're a cohort of people, and they've done like the first round of the teachings. Now they're going to be starting the second round in May, and they're going to be bringing on new apprenticeships. So people who want to learn, it's open to anybody who wants to learn. There's an application process, and the application is going out this month. So this is a very different way of thinking, right? This is because to be a healer is not like a job. Most jobs you apply, right? So there's a lot of other things that go into being a healer. But how do you narrow the pot, right? With like, let's say you have 100 people that are interested. How do you know all 100 people? First of all, we can't teach 100 people at a time. That's just too many people, because this knowledge is highly specialized. You have to take people into the jungle. You have to spend, hours in the jungle. And I'll tell you, I've been studying, traditional healing for at least 10 years. I've been into the jungle a zillion times, but I still have a hard time recognizing the medicine, because I'm not like a botanist. My mind doesn't, the healer can tell me, Trish, what is this medicine used? They'll tell me the name of the medicine, and then I can tell them that what it's used for. But I just have a really hard time knowing the medicine, because to me, everything looks the same. I have to take pictures, I have to study, I have to, watch videos, I have to hear it. Like it's a different way of learning the plants for me. But a story that I want to highlight with apprenticeships is Taga, a young man that I met the other day. So March is Chamorro month, and they have specialized, teachings, or they opened up the Gumazo MT and they did presentations and they made Amit. And I have pictures that I'm going to show you. And so Taga is a young man who is rooted in Guam, and his grandmother was a healer, but his mother didn't learn. And then he ended up joining the army or Air Force, and then moving off Guam. And now he's stationed here. So this young man hears about the apprenticeship. He knows stories about his grandma, and he says, I wanna reconnect with my roots, and I want to learn things that, my mom told me about, but she didn't necessarily learn all of them. I want to be able to learn it from a healer, right? From the teachers, the healers that are running the apprenticeship. And so he stood up a few days ago, and he talked about Daok oil. And Daok oil is a oil that's used for different kinds of skin issues. And those of you who live on Guam, it's this nut that is, abundant all around Marine Drive, and in its green form it can be poisonous, but you dry it out and you wait for it to be brown, and there's a press, and you crack these nuts. And when you crack these nuts, it's a process of, it takes like a month to pick it, to dry it out, to crack it, to make the oil. But when you make the oil, that oil is used for palai, and palai means you rub it on your skin. So any kind of skin disorder, eczema, any rash, Daok oil is a good healing for that. And so he tells his story about learning how to make the Daok oil. But most importantly for me, if there was no apprenticeship, he would not have an opportunity to learn. And he already, by nature of being born into his family and knowing stories of his grandma, and being told the stories from his mom, he already has, this, this gift, right? And now he like knows all these stories, and now he's making the connection. And one thing significant about what he said was, he would not have had this opportunity if this apprenticeship was not around, right? So it made me think about this apprenticeship, and how, because it's still debatable, because like I said, debatable in terms of our cultural values. Some people will say, like, we can't have apprenticeships, people can't learn that way, that's not how you learn. But I will argue, if we don't adapt and adjust, then this knowledge will die, right? We have to adapt and adjust and preserve as much of this as we can with our Chamorro values. We're not going to compromise our values. We're just doing things a little bit different. Next slide. And so here in terms of healing, right? I mean, I've been talking about healing, but I'm, like I said, I'm a clinician, a social worker by profession. And this one day, so the healers get invited everywhere. They get invited to Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness. They get invited to the Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is our drug and alcohol recovery. They get invited everywhere to talk about healing, which is beautiful. But I don't think that they should only be invited during Chamorro month, which is March. They should be invited all the time. It shouldn't be, oh, we have these special guest speakers. No, it shouldn't be like that. It should be, hey, we value these people. They have knowledge to share. We should try to incorporate what they're telling us, what they're teaching us. And it shouldn't be, they come once a year and then that's it, right? That's the part that I disagree with. I think that they should be incorporated as part of our everyday life, and they've been very open to going out, which is again very different, because most people go to them. But there's been so many stories lately of people having strokes or heart attacks that can't come to the Gumazo MT for physical reasons. They can't come, they're bedridden. So the healers go out to their house, they go and they massage, they give medicine. I've been just hearing so many, they're so busy. I sat down with to have lunch with them yesterday, and it's always hard to even schedule lunch with them because they're so busy. And when I sat down yesterday with them for lunch, they just talked about how they're so busy. And I asked, like, because COVID, right? I'm like, you guys are going to people's house like with COVID, And they share with me, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because of, intellectual property and everything, but they share that they do their own treatment for COVID. Don't get me wrong, they still wear their mask, but they feel like they have their own protection from COVID. Because I had asked them things about, what, aren't you scared? You're going into people's houses, like, aren't you scared? And they're like, no, people need help. And, to their testament, it's been a year. We've been experiencing COVID for a year, and knock on wood, they haven't got COVID. Right. So, anyways, that's a side story. So, when we went to Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness, I went with them. I try to go with them to some of their presentations. But this day, I had played basketball and I really hurt my knee. So, I couldn't engage in the presentation. I just sat in the back. But it was God's blessing that I sat in the back because I could see everything from the back. When the presentation, so Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness is our only mental health facility, and they have inpatient and outpatient. So this was inpatient. We were in the inpatient unit doing this presentation. And so many people, and inpatient, some people were hallucinating, some people had delusions, right? And so many of them were, some people had their heads down, some people were not even like, interested in the presentation at all when they were just talking. And the healers don't just talk, they bring their plants. They want to show people their plants, and they always bring medicine. They always bring Amit. They always bring their samples of medicine for people to try. And I saw people from the beginning, and people were like I said, they were just kind of lying down. They didn't seem interested. And then all of a sudden, the after the healers started to show the plants, and then they said, hey, we have this medicine. They poured this cup. Do you want to try this medicine? And then they started to connect about, I'm pretty sure when you were a child, you tried this medicine. I'm pretty sure many of us honestly tried Chamorro medicine, and we remember it. Why? Because some of it was very bitter, and we cannot shake that bitter taste from our mouth. Like, I can just even mention Lorigao, and many of you who tried Lorigao, you're like, oh, that's so bitter, right? And so when the healer started to talk about, do you remember this? It was bitter. Do you want to try it? I'm not, this is the honest truth. Like, many people started to like pay more attention, and some people started to get up and walk towards the plants. And one person volunteered, because they put the medicine in cups in a tray. And one person wanted to take the tray around to give her the other people, the other patients or clients there. And I thought to myself after, right? I was like, what was different? What was different? Why were people not engaged in the beginning, and then they became engaged? And I thought, I thought to myself, I think people were able to connect to the sensory stimulation of those memories, right? To think about their childhood, think about those kind of memories. And some people did start to talk about their childhood. Oh my gosh, I remember my grandma used to give me that medicine, and it was so awful, but my grandma said it was helpful. And so it let them connect, or it helped them connect with memories from the past, right? Even though that was brief, I think that was helpful in that way. And so they became more engaged. They drank the medicine. They started to talk more. They started to talk to each other. They started to talk more. And again, it was very brief, but I thought as a clinician that was significant, right? Because they were able to connect to some kind of sensory and not just the talking, which makes sense because, next slide. Okay, it's not my next slide, but okay, so yes, it is my next slide. So no, sorry, go ahead, next slide. Sorry, I'm just confusing you. So I think people were able to appeal to the sense of smell, taste, sight, and touch, right? The Amit plants were brought in. Sorry, can you go back one slide? The Amit plants were brought in so people can touch and people can see. And this is important, right? Because just last year, I mean, I've read so many things about trauma, but last year I attended this, thanks to COVID. A blessing with COVID is that we have availabilities of all of these online trainings that we probably would otherwise have to fly out to do. Was Dr. Bessel. And he's like this famous guy in trauma, right? He's this renowned researcher, psychiatrist in trauma. And he talked about how when people experience trauma, the method of like PTSD, and I used to work at the VA, it was cognitive processing therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. But he says that the brain's not ready for that. The brain's not ready for that, like to be able, because the brain's still, hyper vigilant in a sense that the brain, when you have trauma, you don't feel safe. You don't feel safe. And if you don't feel safe, like how can you sit down and be able to cognitively do this kind of therapy? And so I was just thinking about this and trying to connect with healing. I was like, it makes so much sense, because when you go to the Guma Zoamti, it's such a welcoming place, right? I mean, I'm in the office now, you can't see, but I'm in the office now that I practice my therapy. And although I try to make it nice and comforting and have these nice pictures, it's still a pretty sterile environment, And so I think with the healers, if in the case of the people, the clients or the patients at Guam Behavioral Health, they were not, most of them, some of them were not able to communicate with words or even a language that is used, that we use for assessments, right? But they were still able to connect to the healers based on like pictures or feeling things and tasting things. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to, press upon, is that we need to do more of that. Dr. Bessel talks about like moving, and he talks about mindfulness and yoga and doing these kinds of things. And how do we connect all of that with our healing and our traditional healers? Next slide. Um, First of all, I want us to have some kind of partnership with the Guam Behavioral Health, with the Lighthouse, with, any kind of treatment center on Guam. I think we should have some kind of partnership. I don't know if we have enough healers at this point to be able to partner up with all these agencies, but I definitely think we should do some kind of pilot to assess, right? And in the 1970s, I was able to find documentation that it was done. Oops. Okay, so I'm just getting a cue that we're gonna take a 10-minute break. So I think I'll stop there and we'll take our break, and then we'll come back in 10 minutes and I'll finish off.
And actually, folks, give us a moment. We're
Oh,
going
okay.
to be working with our slides so that Tricia can transition on, and we will give you a 10-minute break then at this point, so we can get that going, because I know she's got a wealth of information here, and I can certainly see from the comments that we have that you folks are really engaged, even though we don't hear from you often. We do get that sense, right, Dr. Trish?
Yes, and I'm trying to like scroll your comments so then I can better, um, try to address some of these points. Thank you for all the comments.
So we'll take a 10-minute break from here. So remember this slide, story of a model, that was done previously. Just wanted to make sure that we'll be back to this section. But if you will give us a 10 minutes to just get situated here, you will probably see slides going up and doing a bit of test. But please take this opportunity to do some self-care. Get up from that chair that you've been sitting on for the past hour, tuned in, do a quick stretch, go walk to the fridge to grab your favorite beverage. I remembered once on the plane, I had asked, when we used to be on planes, I had asked the stewardess, "Oh, can you give me some diet drink?" She looks at me, she goes, "Water." So go out and grab yourself the best beverage you can consume now, and that is water. So we'll take a moment here. Thank you so much. And I know you'll be eavesdropping on our conversation in our text setup. So we're not gonna close this, otherwise we'll lose you. So please be patient with us, and we'll be back at 9:20. All right, Trish, it's just you and us and everybody else watching.
Okay, so you're gonna take yourself off the thing, and then I'm gonna try to screen share.
Yes, please. Let's try that, because I know, I think of your slides would be great to share with it the video you were showing earlier?
For some reason when I go to basic and I go to desktop, it has like an error message. And
Why
then I
don't
go,
you close it,
okay, close what?
or what you want to exit and come back on?
Exit the chat or the Zoom?
Yeah, exit the Zoom and try that again.
Okay, got it. Okay, let me see. Leave the Zoom.
Polly Ron, you can jump in and maybe make any other suggestion.
If it doesn't work, we should see what the error message is saying.
Okay.
It's still saying.
What does the message say?
It says for basic, it just giving me a error message. Like it says desktop 1, and then it has like the question mark and a square. And then I wonder if I go to files, if it would be in the Google. Is this my Google Drive? Open system. Let me see.
Trisha, this is Taylor. Do you have two like computer screens?
Oh yeah, I have so many things open. Is that why?
I think so. It's probably trying to search it and it's not on the main.
Okay, let me try.
That
Oh my
would
God.
help.
Yeah, it's just trying to figure out which desktop it needs to search.
Okay, let me just try to close that. Okay, let me see. But then I just closed my video. Okay, let me see.
So if your video is also linked to it, you need to open that in the background. But make sure you don't select that.
It still says basic desktop 1. It's okay because you've been doing a great job and you can access my video. My concern was if you couldn't access the video, right? But we're
Yes.
fine. You're doing a great job. And I don't know, because in the schedule, if you could tell me, like, are we leaving like time at the end for them to ask questions?
And
if
I
so,
think, you know what, they've been asking questions throughout.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure as it comes up, we can do that. And I know some of them may be listening, but just to let you know that we were able to acquire several copies of Julian's book, The Properties of Perpetual Light. So there is going to be a quiz. And you mentioned the Susanna, it's the Susanna Wesley Hospital.
Yes.
Okay, so the quiz is going to be, I don't want to ask yet because I know it might be in Google search. So it's going to be relating to that question, and we'll post it up, and whoever gets the answer in the chat, then we'll be able to send them a copy of Julian's book. So I'm pretty sure many have been attentive to that. Because when you said that, it's like, oh my gosh, I remember my dad telling me, we'd pass by there and said, that used to be Susanna Wesley Hospital right there.
Wow.
Do you know where it is? Don't say it.
No, I don't know where the location is.
Oh, well, I guess you're not getting a book.
Can I just get a book for being a presenter?
Of course. But wait, you can ask Julian.
I know. I was supposed to order it, but I missed out on I still can go do it from the University Press, right?
Yes. And he just launched it on Monday. So we're excited that, and he wasn't able to come live on to our session yesterday. So we did have him recorded, and he shared an excerpt from his book. So we appreciate that you're on as well today with us, Trisha. So go take a quick break, Trish.
Okay.
And we'll come back. We'll come back in 6 minutes.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, folks, just wanted to let you know we'll be back on in about 3 minutes. Thank you. Okay, folks, welcome back. We'll be continuing in a quick moment. Uh, and thank you again. We appreciate Dr. Tricia Lizama for joining us. And so, Dr. Trish, let me just fast forward to the slides that I recall you were at. Boom, boom, boom. Sorry about that.
No worries. Do you see me? I can't see myself.
Yes, I see you. And let me just get this one situated.
Oh,
There you go. So welcome back again, folks. Thank you, and hope that quick break was long enough for you to be refreshed. And sorry to interrupt you, Tricia. Just wanted to bring you back to where you last left.
sure, no problem. The break was so quick I wasn't able to take a quick swim in the ocean behind me. um, as I was sharing that I feel like we can have the integrated, with that all the treatment centers on Guam or the treatment facilities, we should have some kind of partnership. And I was able to find in the literature that there was some kind of partnership. I didn't find all the details. This is kind of the extent of in the 70s and 80s that Suruhanu Tunwan Cepeda was a consultant for the Guam Community Mental Health Center. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing, that they hired on a consultant, which was a traditional healer. And I feel like the centers, the treatment facilities should have, I'm going to talk about how we can create spaces to be able to integrate, both of these things. And so these are my dreams, but I know my dreams can one day happen with everyone's help. So can you imagine, like, every village, because every village already has a community center, right? And at our community center, we can have our ZOMT, we can have a doctor, we can have a nurse, a social worker, all at the community center, right? And then everybody's working together, right? Because the goal is to help people, is to help families, so that, you know, I mean, in theory, if we help each other, then everyone's gonna live more harmoniously in our community, right? And that's part of our tomorrow values that I'm gonna go over, is that we need to help each other. We can't be in this for ourselves, right? Tomorrows don't generally like operate like that. And so, I thought, one, and we can have mental health services at the site too, to decentralize, because there's a lot of stigma. I mean, Guam Behavioral Health has done a lot of work, great work. They're still doing great work. They do commercials at the movies. You can go to watch a movie, and the first commercial you're going to see is about accessing mental health services and why you should do this. But there's still a lot of stigma. You know, when I tell people in my work, you know, if I assess that they're suicidal and they have to go to Guam Behavioral Health, the first comment is like, oh, is that the building before the hospital? You know, it has like a negative, you know, connotation to it. And even though we try to like make it positive, and they, like I said, they've been doing a lot of great work. They do a lot of outreach. They've have so many new programs. It's just, you know, a stigma that it, you know, starts also in our culture and how we label people that might have a mental health issue that I'm gonna talk about at the end. And so we need to have greater access to care and be able to integrate, you know, not just our Chamorro culture. Okay, I mean, I've been talking mostly about our Chamorro culture because that's what I know. But like I look, like we saw in the ethnic breakdown, we have, you know, an ethnic group of Filipinos, and Filipinos in their culture, they have traditional healers that are called hilots, and we have a hilot on Guam. I've never met him or her, but we have hilots. I've heard from some of my relatives. In the Palawan culture, in the Chuukese culture, everybody has their own healer, right? And some of these healers are on Guam and are practicing their own medicine on Guam. As a matter of fact, the Gumazo Amti has two Ponapean healers. So we need to, although I'm speaking from the Chamorro perspective, there are all of these other healers that from different cultures that we should integrate also. And there has to be less stigma to getting help. And this is why I feel the great importance to have these kinds of either the Gumazo Amti or these healing centers in general, because when the healers, most of my discussion yesterday was about this. When people go to see the healers, they talk about everything because they feel more comfortable talking to the healer. Right? When I'm in therapy with somebody, I always tell them, I'm straight up with people. I know this is weird. This is awkward. I am a complete stranger, and you are expected to tell me about all your problems. I mean, that's so counterculture. Don't you think? I mean, how many of you would go up to a complete stranger and tell them your deep dark secrets? I'm pretty sure not many of us would do that, right? And it's so counterculture. That's not how we engage with people initially. You know, I know therapy, you know, therapy is helpful and it meets a need, but maybe the way we do it should be changed a little. And so I don't have all the answers. I'm just suggesting some things, right? So right now we have 3 Gumazo Amtis. Next slide. As I shared earlier, healers only get invited for Chamorro month. That this should change. We should have spaces. We should create spaces at the treatment facilities for the healers. Even if they come in, you know, once a week for 4 hours, and you tell the clients, hey, we have, you know, Mama Chai, she's coming to visit for 4 hours. Anybody want to visit with Mama Chai? You know, anybody have an ailment that you want to treat, or you just want to talk to her, you just want to ask questions? I mean, I think there's healing in that because these healers have so much wisdom. Can you imagine? Mama Chai is 85 years old. How much wisdom this woman has, not just about healing, but about life. You know, most of these healers don't have knowledge just about healing, but life in general. So spaces should be created. Gardens should be created. People should grow. All these, you know, facilities, they all have a lawn. They all have a backyard. We should grow medicine for common things. You know, one of the things that I want to grow is called mayana. And mayana is a leaf that if you have a cut, you know, I have 6 children. 5 of them are boys. They are rambunctious children. They always get injured. So they always get cuts, right? And the cure at our house is Neosporin and a Band-Aid, right? But as I do my work, I was like, we should have mayana in our yard, and we should chew that mayana and put it in your cut, right? Instead of Neosporin. And so there are some things that everybody should know that are, you know, common things that, you know, like aloe vera, for example. Aloe vera too is for skin and for cuts. Everybody should have aloe vera in their yard. You know, we shouldn't have to buy aloe vera from a store because it's so abundant on Guam and it's so easy to grow. I do have aloe vera in the front of my yard. So our treatment facilities should have spaces for people to grow, and so the omet should be available on the facility, but also it's therapeutic to go out and garden and plant. I see all of these posts in the beginning of COVID. What are people doing? They're gardening, they're growing food, right? I think we should grow food too. We should grow food and we should grow medicine. And many people started gardens at the beginning of COVID. Many people, like I just kind of, skim people's profiles and I see what are people doing? People are growing stuff and they're exercising, which are all great things, right? You can grow food, you can work in your garden, and you can be doing exercising. That also is healing because you're outside, you're connecting with nature. In the beginning of COVID, not just my children, even myself, we were staying in a lot. It's like, guys, we got to go out. Let's go to the yard. We need to get our vitamin D. Let's go to the beach, right? But we were still very scared in the beginning of COVID. There's a lot of uncertainty. But my kids still play in the front yard. Go outside. We had to make a rule. You have to have 1 hour of sunlight every day. I mean, that sounds kind of bizarre, right? Living on Guam, like we have to tell ourselves that we have to have 1 hour of sunlight a day. But through COVID, I was staying inside. My kids were staying inside. I'm pretty sure many of you were staying inside, right? And so it's like, oh, you got to go out, get the vitamin D. So the same thing for our clients. We should encourage them to be outside, to get vitamin D, to take walks, to grow stuff in the garden, to learn about basic, amit that you can use to treat yourself. Somebody mentioned in the comments, which I very much appreciate, the Amit farm. The Amit farm is a farm near GRMC, the hospital, the new hospital, and Auntie Bernie, she grows all of these omits, and everybody's welcome to go and visit. And she does things. She makes jams and preserves out of mulberry. She has delicious teas that she makes from things that she grows. And her garden's very educational because she has all of these labels about the scientific properties, the English name, the Chamorro name, what are the healing properties of what these things can do for you. So anybody can go up there. Well, I'm not sure about COVID, but before COVID, anybody could go up there for a field trip. As a matter of fact, teachers will take their students there. But again, it shouldn't just be a field trip, a once in a lifetime thing. You should take the time to learn about this knowledge, because that's also part of our preservation and perpetuation, is that we learn these things and we tell stories and we tell other people so that they can learn and then they can pass on these stories. Teaching and reinforcing Chamorro values. Next slide. So, oh gosh, this is in my, so my notes for this is in my other slide, but I'm just gonna sum this up. With these values, to Azuda, or to be Azudanti, is to be a helper, right? These concepts are looking at people helping one another. We're not out to do things for ourselves. We need to watch out for each other. We have each other's back. We have to be courageous. We have to be brave. Sometimes we have to go against the grain, and that's okay. As a matter of fact, we should go against the grain. We should be caring. We should always be compassionate and genuine when we work with each other. And these are the values that the healers have when they're looking for other people, for other people to be apprentices or to be healer. These are the values that we should have, because these are our core Chamorro values. Inafa Malik is something that you hear quite often in most, when people write about values or they talk about Chamorro culture. It's like to make good, to reciprocate, to work with one another, and I do see I think somebody said in a comment that our values are breaking down because of, the way the world is now. And that's true. I mean, I would have to admit that, but we can still change that. We can still change the way we're perpetuating and preserving our value. And somebody also said that parents are not teaching their children certain things. And that can change too, right? Just because we're not doing it now doesn't mean we can't change to start doing it. I'm doing a renovation, and my parents have had to move in with me. And my husband, we've been married for almost 19 years, and he's also Chamorro, and he's like, wow, we've been on our own all this time and your parents are going to move in. And for me, I'm like, oh yeah, what a blessing, And he's like, but we've been alone all this time. And I said, but so what? My parents are going to be with us. Can you, like, for me, the value of the shared intergenerational knowledge, right? I mean, I talk to my parents all the time and they talk to my children, But this is different because we live together. So they get to cook and do lessons about cooking. You know, we get to talk about more things because now we have a shared space. Like, I'm seeing this situation as a win-win-win, right? And my husband's like, I don't know, you know. And I'm like, let's just do it and let's see how it's gonna pan out. And it's been working. It's only been a month and a half and it's been working wonderfully. I mean, it really is a win-win-win. But you know, not everybody has the opportunity, you know, to have your parents around, you know, or to have your parents living with you. And that's really a value thing, because maybe from, you know, from an American value, that maybe people will say, well, you shouldn't be living with your parents, right? But from a Chamorro perspective, it's okay to be living with your parents, especially if we're helping each other, right? It's this, again, concept of inafamalik. We have to help each other. Next slide. So last weekend, the Zoomties celebrated, or they opened the Zoomti to everybody. I mean, it usually is open to everybody, but they had formal presentations. And you can see they made the posters in the background. They had food. Everything about our Chamorro culture is always has to be around food. Always, 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 right? So these shared spaces that I'm talking about that we should create always should have food. That's what brings people in. If you say anything that has to do food, people are already going to be attracted to whatever event you have, because there's going to be food. And even if that's the way to get people in, you can keep them in by doing all of these other things. And so I just wanted to show pictures because they really have taken the time to prepare their space. Next slide. And so here's like a massage table, which looks like a very traditional massage table, right? And so they used the massage table, they created a room and a space. And then here's modern influence. So generally, the omelet doesn't come in these igloos, right? They're usually boiled in these big pots, and they're still boiled in the big pots. But they're preserved in these igloos from Home Depot, as you can see. And they put these hats just to, you know, make it be like more culturally appeasing. And then they've labeled these omelets, and you can see the one on the far right, it says diabetes. So they make a special medicine for diabetes. The one in the middle is omelet pasmu, and usually pasmu is like for flu, pneumonia, any kind of like disease or illness that has to do with your lungs. And then the first medicine is Amat Taninu. And Amat Taninu is kind of like a catch-all. It's for cleansing. It's, you know, you just want to drink Amat, kind of like a maintenance kind of like Amat. Like you can drink it all the time and it's not going to be harmful. Whereas the other two have more prescribed directions for how to drink it. And Taninu, they actually have dried the leaves, and so people can take the dried leaves and you can take it to your house, and they give you the directions of how to boil the leaves. And so you can do it on your own, right? Because that's the thing, is some of these omelets with explicit directions and spending some time with the healer, you can do on your own at your house, and they prefer that you do that, because then you teach people in your family, and then those people in your family teach other people, and here we have the preservation and the perpetuation, very much like a recipe, right? You make, if you're willing to share your recipe, oh, my you know, my son has been making these delicious brookies, but he's not willing to share his recipe because he's going to be a baker and he wants to, you know, preserve his recipes and make money out of it. But in general, most of us will share our recipes, right? If somebody says, oh, that's really delicious, I like that, oh yeah, here's my recipe, go ahead and have it, make your own, right? And then so you go bring those brownies to a party, and then somebody likes those brownies, they're like, wow, this is delicious, how did you do that? Oh, here's my recipe that I got from my friend, go ahead and do it, right? And that's how knowledge gets preserved and perpetuated, by passing it on. Next slide. So these are our healers. So I already talked about Mama Chai. She's always very beautiful and dressed nicely, and she's 85 years old. She's in the green. And Auntie Susan is in the red. She's the masseuse. She knows some of the medicine, but she's mostly the masseuse. That is her strength and her ability. And then Mama Lou in the black, she's originally from Rhoda, and she's started the apprenticeship, and she's going to be here for a while, and she will be continuing on the apprenticeships. And she is 73 years old. she has a wealth of knowledge and wisdom. I can sit and talk with her for hours, and I feel like where did the time go, right? She just has so much information that some of the stories I'm going to share pretty soon. Next slide. And so how do we get people to reconnect to our roots, right? Because with our history of colonization, our people have to have our people need so much healing in general. And it doesn't need to be healing for like a very specific reason. It's just healing. And we have so much historical trauma. There's, I hate to read the newspaper because every day in the newspaper, someone's always being arrested for some kind of sexual offense or sexual assault. And I'm not saying that those things shouldn't be in the newspaper, but we should have positive things in the newspaper, right? It shouldn't be every day that we're seeing that in the front page of the newspaper. And so we have high rates of crime. And I didn't have a chance to research, all of the statistics, but we have high rates of crime. We have high rates of suicide. So how as a people are we going to do some healing, right? And I think we need to go back to our roots. I think our ancestors, our traditional healers have a lot of wisdom, and they've been doing this for a long time. And sure, they don't have these randomized studies that they're publishing in these scientific journals for a good reason, but they have all of this wisdom, and we should take time to listen. We should take a lot of time to listen and to go back to our roots and do many of the things that they're telling us to reconnect. Next slide. In our work, we do assessments, and our assessments are usually very limited, right? An hour to 2 hours, and it's all limited because it's all based on insurance, and it's all driven by, money, and you have to give a diagnosis, and you have to give a code, and that's how you're going to get paid. And I think with the healers, they do their assessments. They don't call it assessments, but they do. They take time to talk with people. They take a long time. And sometimes they take 3 hours. And if you're the customer or the patient waiting, don't worry. Yeah, you might be frustrated because they're taking 3 hours, but they will give you the same time, right? So you have to be patient when you go see them. Sometimes they do take people on appointments, but it doesn't always work that way. The same thing with the clinics, right? I made an appointment with my doctor a few months ago, and I had to wait an hour, and I was very frustrated. Not that I waited for an hour, because he only spent 15 minutes with me. And so the healers, they spend a long time with us, and they give us an opportunity to talk about our life story. It's not limited. Maybe many of the things that, in a formal assessment, you don't want to tell people things that you might be ashamed of or are not pleasant, right? And the healers don't start off with that. They talk about like the ailment, they talk about like your life. And then eventually you develop this, you get this sense that they're genuine and they care about you. And then you want to share more information with them. I'll share some stories that the healer told me yesterday, but I forgot about this. When I told you I only interviewed 11 people, and everybody was saying, when I did my dissertation, people were saying no to me, and I couldn't understand. I was very frustrated. I was so pressed for time because I really wanted to finish my dissertation and just be done and put it behind me. I was almost to a point where I was not going to finish, because it just got very challenging, and I had a lot of children, and I had to tell myself and reframe things like, wow, you're almost done. You can see the finish line. And then economically, I had already spent a lot of money. And so I just couldn't understand, so I had to take a break, and I had to rethink this. I was like, why aren't people wanting to talk with me? And then I thought to myself, I was like, it's because I'm speaking in English. I need to learn my Chamorro better so I can connect better, and I can speak, everything that I have to do in the research. So I can speak Chamorro, I can understand, but it's still very appling, right? Which in Chamorro means broken. Like when you have a sprained ankle, you can't walk good. So they say you're appling. So I enlisted the help of my mother, because there was a healer in my village. And I said, Mom, I don't know why so-and-so, she doesn't want to do my interview. I'm not explaining it to her because I'm not talking to her in Chamorro, and I may have not explained it correctly. And she says, okay, so I tell my mom like the gist of it, and then my mom calls her, and my mom can speak Chamorro, and then my mom calls me back, and she said, Trisha, She'll agree to the interview, but she only wants to do it on the phone. And I'm like, Mom, I can't do this on the phone. I have to see people in real life because I have to do a recording and I have to go through all of this, the informed consent and all of these things that you have to do for research. And my mom says, I don't know. I don't know then. What are you going to do? And so I said, you know what? You put that away. You put your research away. And so I went to go visit her. I went to go visit and her husband was there. And you could tell he was watering the plants, but he was listening because, they were skeptical. But I knew them. I've taken my kids to be healed by her. So it wasn't like I was a complete stranger asking, they live near me also. So long story short, my lesson is I forgot about my cultural values, but briefly. I thought to myself, you cannot just go ask these people to do something for you because you need it done because you want to finish your dissertation. That's being selfish. You need to go and build relationships. How could you forget that? You need to go and talk with her and spend hours talking to her. And even if that takes you 10 weeks to do that, to build a relationship so that she can trust you, because she's going to tell you information that is sacred to her, that she needs to be able to trust you. And who are you to think that she's just going to trust you, right? I had to put myself in check. It was very hard. And so after that, 2 sessions of talking to her, and then I also realized something. I said, you know what, Auntie, I want to ask you all of these things about how you learned. I don't want to know about your recipes. And then she says, you don't? And I said, no, Auntie, I don't. I don't want to know about your recipes because I know that's sacred information. But I'll tell you, even if she told me her recipes, even if I go look up the pictures of all these plants, I'm not going to be able to go into the jungle and find all of these things because it's hard. And you just don't go into the jungle. There's a whole ceremony and prayers and all of these things, to go into the jungle. You can't just go in the jungle and find your medicine. And so even if she told me all her recipes and how to mix it, and usually I'll tell you, when they give you a recipe, when you see anything printed, they're missing like 2 or 3 ingredients. They're not telling you everything because of colonization to protect themselves, right? They're not going to give everybody, just like if you were a baker and you had these prized desserts and cakes that, you made a lot. That's how you sustain your income and you're famous for it. You might give people like, oh, you have to use flour and you have to use all of these things, but you're not going to give them your secret ingredients. You won't. And that's the same thing for them, unless they trust you. Because we had to talk about this issue with the apprenticeship. At one point, do you give the apprentice your whole recipe, the secrets to all of that? And they said, when I know that they're ready, and only they can determine that they're ready. Right. So for me, I forgot all about that. And I had to learn the hard way. And yes, it delayed me, but that's okay. That was okay because I learned a lot of things on this journey. And not every man, there was another healer. He met me 5 times. He wanted to meet me 5 times before he decided if he wanted to do the interview. And he asked me a lot of questions. And on the 5th time or the 5th meeting, he says, I've been consulting with my spirits. And I know that you're a good person. And I'm willing to share some of this with you, but not all of this. And if you're willing for me to not share all of it, then I am willing to do the interview. And I said, of course, you only tell me what you're comfortable with. And, when you do these kind of research studies, I have to transcribe all of this. And I will show you all of it. So if you read all of the things that I transcribed from the interview and there's things that you don't want me to share, then we will take all of those things out. And if we transcribe all of that and you change your mind, that's okay too. You can tell me, Trish, I don't want to do this. I'm taking these transcriptions and I'm going to burn it. I don't want to do this. And that's okay. I will respect that. And he said, okay. And we did the interview. Next slide. So again, just to recap, a healer spends hours with the person. They require generally 3 visits. It could be more. And so even just that, right? Usually when we go to the doctor, they prescribe something and they tell you, well, if you have side effects, if you don't feel better, then you call me. it's not generally, we'll do a follow-up. It depends, right, on if you're getting surgery or you're being discharged from the hospital. Of course, you're going to do a follow-up. But with most things, you call me, and I can tell you, most Chamorros, and I can tell you from my parents, they are very passive. Some of them are very, I don't want to generalize, some of them are very passive. So they don't question the doctor. They will not call. If there's a side effect, they will just stop taking the medicine. They will not call and follow up and say, hey, doc, I got this side effect. Can you prescribe me another medicine? I can tell you that from the experience of my parents. They'll just stop. And then I have to encourage them, mom, some medicines you can't just stop. You got to go follow up. And it's like, hey, but what am I going to tell the doctor? And I'm like, you tell the doctor that you've experienced these negative side effects. Do you need me to go with you? And they're like, and they don't want me to go with them because they think I'm too assertive, right? I'm not aggressive, but I'm like, mom, you have to advocate for yourself. It's not, the doctor's not always right. They don't always know what symptoms people are going to experience. Everybody experiences these symptoms differently and have different reactions to these medicines. Like, it's okay to go and, it's like giving them permission to say it's okay to go to the doctor. Anyways, but with the healers, they follow up. They want to make sure that, do you feel better tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Do you feel better? Are you feeling a little bit better? If you're not feeling better, okay, maybe we need to change up what we're doing. Or tell me what you're doing. Maybe we need to add another step, right? So that's not only a lot of time, that's a lot of concern. That's a lot of compassion. I care about you. I care about what happens to you. And they tell people that straight up. And they tell them, if you don't come back to see me, then there are consequences. You might not get it better. You might get sick. You need to follow this protocol because I care about you. Next slide. Can this be done? Yes, it can be done. It's being done in other cultures. The one example that I'm using is Palau. I've been fortunate to be able to visit Palau on a project a couple of times and been invited into their taro patch. Walk into the jungle and go into the taro patch. And that's very humbling for me because I'm not Palauan. I'm not of the culture. And just be able to go and see where the almond is grown and to be in this sacred space where anything that is a taboo subject in regular life can be talked about in this taro patch for women. If you're having marital problems, sexual issues, family problems, drug problems, anything that might be a taboo to talk about in a regular space, here you have your sacred space of the taro patch. You could talk about everything. We need to create those sacred spaces so that people can talk about everything, so that there's no stigma, there's no judgment. We need to create those kind of spaces, and I've offered suggestions, but like I said, I don't have all the answers. I think we should start somewhere though, and we need to start soon. And that's for women in the taro patch. In the fishing boat is where men talk about all of these things. And if you go back to Guam history, they used to have these places. It was called a Gumar or a Tao, where men would talk about sexual things, would talk to their sons about everything, how to be a man, all of these things. But again, from a different perspective, through colonization, through religion, these houses were labeled a different way. They were being labeled as like a sex house or an inappropriate house. You don't talk about these things. So I think we need to be okay. We need to allow us to give ourselves permission, to give other people permission to be able to talk about these things, that they are not easy things to talk about, but they will allow for healing if we have a space to be able to talk about these things. I'm going to skip the example from Dr. Carrillo. Next slide. I'm just looking at my time. So please remind me again, do I stop at 10 or
You actually have until about 10:30.
Okay,
Only
great.
because folks have been commenting. And so folks, just a reminder, if you have any question that pops up, we'll be able to address that. And actually, if I may take this moment before you go into assessing in your next slide, there are some comments in the Q&A. So of course, there's that Chelsea has been most eloquent with her comments about wanting to start the community partnership And to make this dream, we need both people in the community and the resources to work together. And she's commenting that we can make this happen, especially with our technology today. And then to connecting with organizations and people with healers. The healers will bring us back to true tradition and healing. So yes, definitely. And of course, some of the other comment is to heal. So overall, I hear, I'm pretty sure if we were live and in person, you'd see lots of heads nodding as you presented, Tricia. So just wanted to remind all, since there weren't particular questions in the Q&A then to share with you, just wanted to remind you, please utilize the Q&A or the chat as well to ask your questions along. So Tricia, continue.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I appreciate all the comments and the questions. So what does this mean? I mean, you know, we just have to be genuine and compassionate when we work with everybody. And the healers provide a great example for that because everybody is welcome. Nobody is turned away based on your economic level or what you can pay or on ethnicity, right? Everybody, so other ethnicities seek out Chamorro healers, right? Just to kind of clarify that. It's not just Chamorro people seek out Chamorro healers. They have all these different ethnicities come to seek healing from a Chamorro healer. And so, when we look at assessment, we look at assessment from a biopsychosocial spiritual perspective, right? We look at the person in their whole entirety. And healers do this, right? They do it in a different way than maybe the way that we're taught, but they do it. If the healers believe, and I have to try to explain this eloquently, in our Chamorro custom, culture, belief system, we believe in like harmony, right? So if something's disrupted, if something's not harmonious, then it affects everything. And so let me give you an example. So if you have conflict in your family, right? Like let's say, I have conflict with my mom. Then of course, my mom is near and dear to me. I cannot have conflict with my mom. If I have conflict with my mom, it's going to disrupt the way I interact with everybody, really, because I'm going to be so bothered about the fact that I have conflict with my mom that I'm going to want to resolve that conflict, right? And when I resolve that conflict, then the rest of my life is going to be harmonious. Then I can go back to operating, how I generally operate. And so when I take that in a traditional sense, in a spiritual sense, I'm going to use the jungle. So I had shared earlier that on Guam, we don't just enter the jungle if you're picking medicine. And in general, you just don't enter the jungle and like take things without permission, because the belief is that everything in the jungle has a spirit, and you have to ask the spirit. Even if you don't see the spirit, you could feel the spirit. Even if you don't feel them, the belief is that that they're there, and you don't just take something that doesn't belong to you. I always tell this to my kids. You're not just going to go behind your teacher's desk and take the stapler without her permission, would you? And they're like, no. I'm like, you wouldn't go to your mom and dad's room and like open a drawer and take something without their permission. And they're like, no, right? And so why would you go into the jungle and take things that wouldn't belong to you without asking for permission? And so, because in the Chamorro belief, if you do that, then the spirit will make you sick or will punish you in a way. It depends on what you're doing, but it could be a lesser degree with a pinch. They'll say like, oh, if you have a purple mark on your body, because that's usually how Taltamuna pinches are. They're like purple. They're like, oh, Toka, what did you do? Did you go into the jungle? You didn't ask for permission? And then that'll like, oh yeah, I did go into the jungle. And like even my kids, they will go in, like let's say we're like at the beach or in the jungle or something, or one of them needs to pee. They already know that they have to ask permission, and they say it in Chamorro, like Gwala Zangwalu, Cocina by Usay Keman Dispensa zo, or Gwala Zangwalu by who Hanam Pare Itano Nisita Estina Amut. Right. So they know to ask permission, and we should ask permission, you know, and in theory, if you don't ask permission, then you're going to be harmed in some way. And what, but if you go back and you apologize, you say, "Guala zangualo dispensa, dispensa," right? I'm sorry. I'm sorry for whatever I did. I'm sorry for throwing my trash in the jungle. I'm sorry for picking an omelet. I didn't, you know, I didn't ask for permission. I'm sorry for peeing and I didn't ask for permission. Then they will forgive you, and then it becomes harmonious, right? Then you will be healed. Your wound will heal. It becomes this, like, again, this sense. So when I talk about harmony and conflict, it's not just with people, it's with nature, with the ocean, with the jungle, with the land, right? And every, man, I have so much to share and I have to kind of like limit it, but every land, ocean, you know, every part of nature has their own spirits that protect them, and that we need to ask for permission. Next slide. So I asked the healers, right? I asked them, you know, Auntie, I call everybody Auntie, you know, do you, what treatments do you have? Do you have any specific treatments for alcohol abuse, for drug abuse, for overdosing? And the general response is yes, right? But this is how they triage in their mind. So um, Mama Lu was taught by her grandma, and she's a master Surahana, master Zoamti. Her grandmother taught her 234 plants to use for treatment, or so 234 types of treatment. And the way they triage treatment is whatever you're experiencing, what part of the body is being affected. And based on what part of the body is being affected, these 234 treatments is targeted towards certain parts of the body. So that's how they determine how to treat certain things. So they didn't get into detail with me because they want to protect that. But they did tell me that there are amats, medicines for these types of issues. And the way they determine, again, is depending on the type of part of your body. Like, so let's just say alcohol abuse, for example, your liver is being affected. So there's amet for your liver. And that's the amet that they're going to give you for your liver. But there's also amet, because my next question was, what if you're, you know, you consume too much alcohol and you want to stop drinking alcohol? And they said, yes, there's a treatment for that. And without going into too many details, there's treatments of like a special bath, an inhalation of medicine, and a drinking of medicine to treat alcohol and drug abuse, right? But so again, they didn't go to too many details because they still, you know, want to protect the knowledge, but that's kind of the extent of what they shared with me. Next slide. So I asked them these questions. Any types of treatment for sexual assault, abuse, attempted suicide, any family issues, grief, bereavement, marital or relationship problems, or overall mental or emotional health? So this was my conversation with them yesterday, because I know that when we talk about healing, I wanted to address these issues with you. And like I shared, you know, first I asked them, are these topics that people talk to you about? Yes, Trisha, people talk to us about a lot of different things. And, you know, some of their interpretation or some of what they shared, again, has a spiritual I guess a spiritual interpretation for these things. And so I had asked them, I said, so if somebody comes to you for, so I gave them a bunch of scenarios, okay? Because it's also hard to talk about these things with them, like be direct, right? So I said, Auntie, what if a 15-year-old teenager was sexually assaulted and they went to Healing Hearts, which is our treatment center here, and they did the exam, the forensic exam, they did the interview, they gathered the evidence for, you know, in the event they go to trial. But the mom is bringing the daughter to you because the daughter feels very fearful. You know, she feels anxious, she feels fearful, she doesn't want to go to school. She always wants you to be mom to be next to her. What would you do in that situation? And she says, okay, you know, like we have a medicine for that. You know, so she talked about, oh man, because I really want to do research on this particular medicine, and it's called. I'm just going to tell you in tomorrow, just because it's easier. So there's a medicine that is called a senton gap gap, and the root is the gap gap, the gap gap plants, right? But a senton gap gap. I'm going to tell you a funny story. So I went to Rhoda to do research, and when I left, you know, people that know me, they're like, Trish, bring Fan back the senton gap gap, because it's hard to do here on. It's hard to do this on Guam. It's a process that takes 1 week. So, you know, not really understanding what they wanted me to do, I just agreed to do it. So you go into the healer and she's doing all of these things. And I said, Auntie, so and so wants me to bring back some Ascent and Gap Gap. You know, do it? Can I order that now? Because I know it has a process. And can I bring it home? I was staying there for a week, and she says yes. You know, it'll take a week to prepare anyways. So the Ascent and Gap Gap, you know, when she showed it to me at the end of the week, so because she was showing me the leaves, so I didn't witness the whole processing of the gap gap. We picked the leaves, had to be dried, but I missed a few steps, right? Because I was off interviewing other people. And so this leaf is dried and then it's pounded and it turns into this white powder, like cocaine, right? So she puts it in a bottle for me. And she says, you take this back, right? And I'm looking at this powder and I'm like, well, how is customs gonna know that this is not like a drug? You know, how are they going to know that? Are they just going to believe me? You know, sir, this is like a sense gap gap. It's a tomorrow medicine and it's used for X, Y, and Z. You know, like, will they believe me? Because I've never carried back medicine before. So I didn't know the process about customs. I didn't know any of that. Well, so all of that gets taken away from me. But there's a process, right? So it gets taken away from me at that time at the airport, but it gets given back to me after I do the process and they test all of these things. So I had like a 2 day delay of like getting the medicine. So it wasn't too bad, but it was funny because I thought like, oh my gosh, what if they think it's cocaine and I like get arrested? Like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm going to get arrested in Rhoda, you know, but the Ascension Gap Gap, when she showed it to me, how it looked, because I'm only used to seeing the plant and the root, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, my grandmother has that medicine in our refrigerator. My grandmother would give us this medicine anytime we told her we felt afraid, something scared us, our heart was beating fast. We got into a car accident. We came home and you know, the people involved told her like, grandma, like we feel so scared, you know, like this hyper vigilance, this anxiety, right? So I didn't know that at the time. So at the time when grandma would give it to us, she'd just do a pinch of this Ascension Gap Gap with water and you drank it. And then immediately you would feel this calming effect. And then the person I was giving it to, they took it back to Guam and I asked my friend, I said, what do you use this for? And she's a botanist and she says, or a herbalist rather, she says, I use it for like anxiety and like calming. Like if I feel nervous or I feel scared, I just feel nervous. I feel scared. It has this calming effect. And she told me, she says, Trish, I had a miscarriage and I felt so a miscarriage, you have physical symptoms and then you have emotional symptoms. So she went to the doctor to deal with the physical symptoms. And then on the way home, she didn't feel right. She felt like this, anxiety, this nervousness, or this fear, like this, she just felt really uneasy. And she thought to herself, like, I need a Senton Gap Gap. I need that. But she didn't have it at the time. So she called Mama Chai. And she says, Mama Chai, I need this Senton Gap Gap. And Mama Chai says, Parafa, gal, what do you need it for? Come by. What do you need it for? And she says, Mama Chai, I just had a miscarriage. And emotionally, I just don't feel good. And she says, Ay, gal, I'm very sorry. Come. And Mama Chai gave her the Senton Gap Gap. It helped her with her calming her nerves. And then Mama Chai sat with her and laughed at her, massaged her, talked to her. And then somebody just asked on the questions about women issues. There's something called a laboratory. It's like a sitz bath. I don't know how better to describe it, but a sitz bath with herbs, right? For like cleansing. And so they have a formula for when you have a baby, like when do you use it? How often do you use it? And the laboratory, the person I'm talking about, actually, as a matter of fact, in a couple of weeks, we belong to a group called Hagen Famalawan, and we're going to be doing another talk where she's giving the herbalist is going to give out kits to our participants, and one of those kits is the laboratory. She's putting all the leaves together and wrapping it up, and then giving you instructions, verbal instructions, and then written instructions, and then you take that home, and then you do your own sitz bath with your hot water. Right? Again, this is part of our preservation and perpetuation. You can go to the healer to prepare that for you, but we want to teach you how to do things on your own, because that you can learn how to do in your own. You can do it because after you have your baby and you do the recommended regimen, then you should do it once a month for like cleansing, right? And there's like a time frame of when you're supposed to do that. So then when you have your own daughter, if you have your own children or your own nieces, then you can teach them how to do that. And these leaves can be found in the jungle, and they'll tell you where to find it. It's more abundant than some things. So there is, so going back to my friend, she took the Senton Gap, which would be the same omelet that they would give somebody who's gone through the trauma of being sexually assaulted or sexually abused. They would give you that to help you calm down. And then the second part would be they would do a cleansing of some sort to help you cleanse your physical body. And so that's one of the things that they had shared with me yesterday. And as far as the suicide, they try to talk with people, and they do a suffing, because they believe that if somebody is thinking or contemplating about suicide, that they're in a very dark place, which is very true, and that there's a lot of like evil that's influencing that. And so they do like a procedure, a suffing, a spiritual cleansing, and they give medicine. And then I asked them, though, because right, my Western mind is coming from the clinician standpoint, and he said, what would you do if they said, what, this was like helpful, or it wasn't so helpful, I still want to like kill myself, what would you do? And then they would tell them about like Guam behavioral health, or they said, maybe we'll call you, Trisha, to help us. This is why I think this is why we need a partnership for some of these issues, right? Because if somebody is truly suicidal and we have assessed them and all the red flags are there, then we also might need the follow-up. We can still do what the traditional healer wants to do, but we might also need, in conjunction, the follow-up of like Guam behavioral health, right? Because my thinking is, what if the person is, delusional or hallucinating or psychotic, right? So their thinking is not logical. We can't let them go out and like kill themselves. So, but one of the healers has been trained in like assist, so she does know some of those steps and to contact Guam behavioral health and wellness. So we talked about that. And then if they have family issues, the family issues, it's more, again, talking. And then if it's affecting your heart, because you feel sad and it's affecting your heart, then there's a medicine for your heart, right? So that's kind of how they triage. It's based on what part of your body. And like I said, there's 234 medicines to address every single part of your body. I really think, with all of these things, that one key thing is that they also spend time with you to listen, to be genuine, to try and to connect with you. And that in itself is very therapeutic, and it's very helpful. And it's in an environment that is not necessarily sterile. It's not, it is sterile in terms of like it being clean, but it's not like sterile, like in a doctor's office, like with a bed, a medical bed there. It's like they have comfortable chairs. She can bring her mom. She could bring her, the girl that I'm referring to, in the scenario, she can have her mom there. That's very scary, right? Like, I'm just kind of trying to empathize with this person. And I just made up the scenario, but I'm just thinking like how scary that's going to be for this young person. So I think, I again, this presentation is by all means not to like solve, our issues, but it's certainly a start. And I think if we can shift our thinking, and I always tell people, and you'll see it, I want to leave some time for the video, is that sometimes I am torn because I've been raised in a Chamorro family with my grandma, and I have my Chamorro values, but I've been educated in a Western way that I kind of label myself to be a hybrid person. Sometimes I'm on the fence about certain things because I feel like, I have both of these worlds, and sometimes these worlds do conflict. They very much do conflict, which does pose a big problem for me. And I luckily I have my sinus, my elders, my mom, I have my colleagues that are also Chamorro, that I can be able to like debrief some of these issues, because I'm like, oh, this it's really like sometimes a clash. And so but I have a support, to be able to talk about these things. And I think everybody should have a support, because it's a hybrid world, that sometimes I'm trying to navigate through this hybrid world that can be difficult. Next slide. And I just wanted to show you the tools. So in English, this is the mortar and the pestle. And in Chamorro, it's called the lusung or manu and the lomok, right? So these are the tools of how the traditional healers take the omelet and they put it and they smash it, they mix it, they pulverize it sometimes. These are the tools that they use. And from the earlier pictures, you saw that, that in the pictures that they had their tools on for display, some of it comes in like rock, some of it, is in like ceramic or metal or like wood. The more traditional ones are like rock, the one on the far left. But I've seen so many different sizes and shapes of these ones, the lomok and the lusang. Next slide. And just really quick, the Cedars, the Center for Excellence as part of UOG, they came up, I should have put, they did this project that I was part of, and it's a Chamorro behavioral health glossary. And so we put in, excerpts of traditional healing, and they disseminated this to all the different clinics, doctors, everywhere. Everyone should have a copy of this because it was a free resource to people. And I think it's very helpful because some people like Dr. Taiminglo and Dr. Lily Paris, who are, clinicians on Guam, they did sections of what are the Chamorro words for mental health issues. And sometimes these words can be, can perpetuate some stereotype, right? For example, if somebody is crazy, and I don't even like to use the word crazy, the Chamorro word is kaduku, right? But I think honestly, and I'll tell you this story in 2 minutes or less, because I really want you to see parts of the video. So I grew up with my grandmother, and my aunt, who in her 20s, honestly, in hindsight, I really think she probably had postpartum depression, amongst other things. After she had her son, she had a psychotic break. That's the Western way to label it, okay? But my grandmother and my grandfather, they didn't know about psychotic break or mental health issues or anything like that. So from their worldview, which was also my worldview, they thought she was being possessed by an evil spirit. And they took her to different Suruhanus. This is probably also sparked my interest because I went with them. I went with them everywhere. We went to every church and light a candle. We prayed for her. We went to every traditional healer to get her healed. And the icing on the cake, I think, or the factor that my grandparents decided to take her into Guam behavioral health is because she lost all her bodily functions, right? So it became a medical issue. Like, why is this happening to you? And so my grandmother and grandfather, with advice from my aunt, took her to Guam behavioral health. And I'm not, this is the old hospital, and I went with them. I accompanied them to everything, right? That's why I feel like I'm an old soul. And so I'm not joking. When we went to the old hospital, we dropped her in the front. Somebody came to get her. This was probably in the mid 80s. And then my grandparents got a call to pick her up a week later. And she came out, she looked better, and she came with like medicine. And they told us, as long as she takes her medicine every day, she's going to be okay. No, because I was like probably a teenager, I don't know what that medicine was. I don't know, what, we just knew that she had to take it every day, and she did. And she was so much better. She didn't have those active delusions. Like, there were things like, the devil's after me. She'd be running around the house. The devil's after me. Trisha, let's go. We got to hide because, I mean, really bizarre things, right? But all of that from my worldview was all cultural. Fast forward. So she got better. She took the medicine. She never came to the point, or she never like worked again, but that was okay. She raised her son. She was a good mom. She raised her son. She was there with my grandparents to keep them company. So it was okay. It worked out, right? And she, she really was a good mom. And so fast forward, I get my master's. So I get my bachelor's in social work and psychology. I get my master's in social work. I go to UH. And everybody keeps telling me about this guy named Dr. Ronnie, he's getting his PhD. He's in Hawaii. They're like, you got to meet Dr. Ronnie. You got to meet Dr. Ronnie. He's tomorrow. You guys should connect. I never met Dr. Ronnie at that time. I go home to Guam for Christmas. And my mom's in the yard, and there's a stranger. I don't know this man. And she says, hey, this guy is Dr. Ronnie, right? And I thought to myself, is this the same Dr. Ronnie? Why would he be at my house? Did he come all this way to meet me because he knew that I was also going to school at UH? That's kind of what I was thinking, because I'm like, why would he come to my house, right? How would he even know where I lived? And so my mom says, oh, this is Dr. Ronnie. You should talk with him. And he's here to see so-and-so, my aunt, right? And I'm like, what connection does Dr. Ronnie have with my aunt? Like, I was so lost. And so Dr. Ronnie says, hey, Trish, I heard about you. I'm glad you're going to UH. He says, I'm finishing up my PhD, and I'm doing my dissertation on patients who have been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and how successful they are with the support of their family. I was clueless. I still didn't get it. I was like, so why are you here? Oh, I'm here to see your aunt because she's part of my. We looked at mental health records, and she was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And I was like, what? And mind you, I was, this is my education. This is my field. But I only saw her illness, her disability from a from a cultural lens. I mean, even as I tell you this day, right now, I still have a hard time believing that she was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. But I can tell you, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if she was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, or that she was made sick by the spirits, or it was, it didn't matter, because my family, the way we viewed her is, we viewed her as a person. We viewed her as a person with a disability, and we still treated her with respect, and like she was part of our family. We didn't treat her any differently. We just made accommodations for her. And an accommodation would be, if we were going to a party, we would always ask her if she wants to go. And if she says she didn't want to go, we didn't force her to go, because sometimes she would feel uncomfortable with being around a lot of people that she didn't know. And so we didn't force her. And we just ask her, what do you want us to bring you food? Yes, bring me food. Okay. And then we would bring her food, and we're like, you're okay by yourself? Yes, I'm okay. Right. And so that's kind of how we didn't, that's why I'm telling you this, because from a cultural lens, there was no way I would, because when I think of somebody who has diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, I think of someone who's very ill, who's not able to function, to function at all, and who's very debilitated by medication. And I didn't see any of that in her. I mean, other than not wanting to work, but I think it also had to do with raising her son. And so this behavioral health glossary, helps, especially people that are not from here, have a better understanding that if people use these terminologies, to not necessarily dismiss it or discredit it, right? Because there is so much value in it. And, I don't know if Cedars is still giving it out. I don't have any copies to give out, but I think if you picked up one, it's great information. So I'll end with that. And if we could switch to the video really quick, I think I have 8 more minutes, just so you can see some of the healers and some of the things that they do. You know, it's better described by seeing them do things instead of me talking about stuff. You are you just go back to that slide with the Dropbox, right? Or you still have it open? Oh, I can't hear you.
I actually downloaded it
Oh,
so
okay, okay.
that it would show better. So let me share my screen with you. Can you see that? So where do I start then? At
Just
one?
just move it up, maybe like after that, like maybe 5 minutes, just so we can see some of it. I wanted to contribute to building the knowledge of our culture because there isn't very many things that are written about our Chamorro culture. I've been doing my research for about 5 years now, right? You can fast forward. I want to see the healers. Over 30.
Here, some more.
Okay, here. Yeah, just a little bit. Right, but um, this was an apprentice. Go ahead and fast forward. Okay, here. This is Mama Chai, the healer that I originally showed you.
Can you
Para
hear?
guaho,
Yeah.
anta tanesti is
This is
Dr.
Uncle Manny. He lives in Saipan.
Pan
He's such a great consultant.
man aamti no gua claro na diferencia. Guaha izuna na amot gua izuna chetnod zangin guaho aamti ne azani na jizo tisinya beho amtin maisa zo sita otro lo ata chulino gati ki western como guaho ni doctor estikina amot chinotto sinya beho Sina tunotto per temperatura mama den sina tauta sina izin mismana amani raji tauta sina be amti sa temperatura mami lo gine gi am natibane guaizina na cheno tisina tegano pus para guaho a anok na tisinya is a anok na gaigisti ibanda namot no natibo gi tus poron bi otto tipon set bin mais saho documento gua gini museum giza
Go
garapan
ahead and
saipan
fast forward a little bit.
no skeleton istine is
Say when.
A little bit further. Okay, go ahead. Stop here. Um, and probably because the healer or the zoamti has many hardships, right? They have to work early in the morning. Most of them had jobs, so they had to work in between their jobs.
is a fact. Well-known healers tibula tinungonya from Safi to Tenonmai Pitodo. But because this person realized that it was a difficult thing to do, to be one like that, purposely he did not give all of what he knew to his children. He just limited. So he knew some things that he purposely did not get because he did not want his children to go through the hardship or go through what he went through. So that is a factor in the decrease of the practice and the number of people. The availability of the plants too. And the other issue is being a healer, a zoamti, you're not paid a steady paycheck. I mean, you're given, for the most part, you're given goods, you're given rice or chicken. Some of them are given money, some of them are not accepting of the money. And so that's a hardship, because they kind of rely on
thanks that people give.
Ti makaristi como un atitude kumetungo pus pogoloki I bilado o nono I hemplu I mas paguna pagunu nza o kadgamo nastiloki na tiningo ginengwa ginas na naudani biam mami pus kulang pagu dididik no mamakat pata pananogi man hobin sa ganan niya man mono man pasyo man solan lo como dididik u noi fesa za u a fesas para minaulik niya zona tiningon tawag tu singa sumulit tiningon lo ibrao nina pan maulik para minaulik niya.
So how we're trying to deal with this issue is we're trying to build an apprenticeship.
What I'm seeing, Zika, is your effort and the drive to revitalize and or practice and having places for plants to be. It's really remarkable, and I thank you for doing that. And all everyone else who see that, it's important, because if we don't do it, who's going to do it? No, and I'm happy that we're doing it, and you are a great factor on Guam doing that.
I've lived in Seattle for 13 years. I moved home about 5 years ago, and I got my degree in herbal science, and that through Bastyr University. And my goal was to learn as much about herbal medicine and the scientific
The
aspects.
documentary was available on TV, and I gotta thank Nina because she helped me like convert it and put it on MP4. So I need to do a YouTube channel and make it available for everybody to watch. So I will need help doing that. So I'm gonna ask my brother-in-law to help me do a YouTube channel, but I can make the documentary available to everybody to view.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Trish. And certainly when you get that situated, we can also upload it. So those attending will be able to get the link or be able to access the video also on our site. So you have a few seconds, if you would, just to jot down any other questions that you may have. Otherwise, email us, and we can also provide, as has been requested, then information on what you have on how to contact and connect with you, Dr. Trish. So at this point, I know we are at the hour, and with all due respect to our attendees, especially all the way from the East Coast, we thank you, because it is certainly well into the evening for you. And we want to thank you all for participating as well. Any last words, Trish?
No, thank you very much. I'm putting my email on the chat. So if anybody wants to reach out or they want to know more information, and when I do have the link, I'll send it to you, Cynthia, so you could send to everybody. The more people that watch and the more knowledge that is shared and perpetuated is much better for all of us, right? And so hopefully Guam we can have a model that people can replicate. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate, I'm so honored to be invited and to have 2.5 hours to speak. At first I was like, wow, that's a long time, but I was like, wow, that's so awesome. I get to talk about all of these great things. So thank you very much.
And Dr. Tricia, what we're realizing is 2.5 hours is not enough. we can promise that you will be back. And certainly, like you said, it shouldn't be just to tie in with Mes Chamorro, and March was Chamorro month, and that's how we actually got the theme for this webinar series. So we appreciate your sharing the information, and especially your research, and putting to life then the cultural values, because much of what you shared is like, oh my gosh, yeah, I remember that when we were growing up as well. So here's to you all. I know if you were listening during the break when we were just checking out our tech series here, Tech Issues. For those of you who are interested in getting a copy of the of our the book that Julian Uggen just recently issued, we are acquiring several copies. So earlier on in the first maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes of her presentation, Dr. Lizama made reference to a Susanna Hospital. It's actually Susanna Wesley Hospital. And I remember too from my father saying, oh yeah, this is what used to be here and what used to be there. So taking and having that moment with someone who knew the land before we know it now. So the question I pose to you is in the chat, I'll give you 1 minute and we'll extend over 1 minute to identify where the location, or at least close to what village, the location of the Susanna Wesley Hospital was. And of course, that was post-war, and they had it, and it was, I will say, in the heart of Guam. And of course, the heart is wherever you are. So it could have been in your village. So put in the chat. And for those who come up with the correct answer, we will certainly issue you and send to you a copy of the book that Julian Uggen just recently issued. Okay, I see some people guessing, but those are great guesses. I'll give you half a second more, post that. We didn't want much time to send this out because you could have probably found it on in Google. Okay, so that's it. To whoever responded, I am giving you the answer now. It is actually close to, it is in Hagatnya. I'm trying to remember if it is exactly where the library that we know it as, the Nevis Flores Memorial Library. My understanding is on that block is where Susanna Wesley Hospital was built. And yes, it was post-war. No, I wasn't there. But now we all know that there are certainly these key landmarks and parts of our history in our islands, in the core of our island as well, the history of what has happened on Guam and how those have perhaps shaped the way we do what we do today. But thank you, Tricia, for helping us reach out to the wealth of information and knowledge from our Saina, from our Zoamti, from our healers, and reaching out to everyone, our attendees here. Perhaps you might be interested in the apprenticeship program as well. So thank you, Dr. Tricia, and for inspiring our potential apprentices in the group. Thank you, folks.
Okay, dankala sa Sus Masi. Adios.
Adios. Oh, Dr. Lizama, don't forget your email. I will put it in the email.